The most important expedition of the 19th century was undertaken by Meriwether Lewis and William Clark. Contrary to the popular notion that they were charged with exploring the Louisiana Purchase, it was indeed the vast area they explored, but their expedition was planned well in advance of the Louisiana Purchase. President Jefferson handpicked Lewis and Clark. Meriwether Lewis, following his Army duty, served as President Jefferson's personal secretary from 1801 to 1803. William Clark, also a former Army officer, was Lewis's close and trusted friend. Their purpose, in the words of Jefferson, was to find the water communication across this continent. In other words, a route by water linking the Mississippi River and the Pacific Ocean. In addition, they were charged with mapping the territories they explored, holding diplomatic meetings with the Indian tribes they encountered, and studying plant and animal life they observed in their travels. They set off on their history-making journey May 14, 1804 from St. Louis, Missouri. Their vehicle was a 55-foot keelboat and two smaller boats, carrying a total of 45 men and tons of provisions including corn, pork, whiskey, gunpowder, carpentry tools, medicine, blankets, tents, and gifts for Indian tribes such as mirrors, combs, earrings, and fish hooks. Heading north, their plan was to travel up the Missouri River as far as the Rocky Mountains by winter, cover what they considered to be a short distance between the Missouri and Columbia rivers, and then descend the Columbia to the Pacific, reaching their objective by fall of 1805. Traveling north on the Missouri River proved more difficult than they expected, however, and by November they had gone only as far as central North Dakota. The winter of 1804 was spent with the Mandan Indians. Here they gathered information on the lands that lay before them. And it was here they met Sacagawea. She was a Shoshone Indian who became very important to their success. She had come to North Dakota from Shoshone country with her husband, a French fur trader. She was pregnant, and Meriwether Lewis, having some medical training, served as her midwife when she gave birth. Lewis and Clark hired Sacagawea's husband as an interpreter, and she came along with the expedition as a guide to lands familiar to her. Her presence with the baby reassured Indians they encountered on their way that they were not a war party. The next leg of their trip took 3 months, from April to July of 1805. They covered the ground between the Mandan village and the Three Forks of the Missouri River. The most difficult part of the journey lay ahead, crossing the Rockies. They purchased horses from the Shoshones, stashed their canoes, and headed off into the hills. The path they took crossed the Bitterroot Range of the Rockies in Montana into northern Idaho. The torturous 3-month ordeal of crossing the Rockies nearly killed Lewis and Clark. It left men and horses weakened and sick, in need of a long rest before continuing. In the words of Meriwether Lewis from his journal, "The pleasure I now felt in triumphing over the Rocky Mountains can be more readily conceived than expressed." The final leg of the trip began in October of 1805. They followed the Clearwater River to the Snake, which they followed to the Columbia River. The Columbia led them to their goal, the Pacific Ocean. At the mouth of the Columbia, at modern-day Astoria, Oregon, they built their winter headquarters at Fort Clatsop. After a 4-month rest, they set out on the return trip in March of 1806, retracing their steps to the Rockies. There, Lewis took part of the party down the Missouri River, and Clark led the rest of the party down the Yellowstone River. They rejoined on August 12, 1806, on the Missouri River and returned together to St. Louis on September 23, 1806, a full year later than they had planned. Lewis and Clark had covered more than 8,000 miles. Their journals and maps charted unknown lands. They interacted with dozens of Indian tribes and they wrote the first scientific descriptions of 178 plants and 122 animals. They never met their central objective, finding a water route from the Mississippi to the Pacific. But they did prove the objective was a myth. And in the process, they pioneered the overland route to the Pacific across the Rocky Mountains. A huge blank space on the map of North America had been filled. William Clark was appointed Superintendent of Indian Affairs in 1807. He also served as Governor of Missouri Territory. Meriwether Lewis was appointed Governor of Louisiana Territory in 1806, a post he filled until his death in 1809.